Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's RSM Classic. Gonna break down what to expect from Sea Island, both tracks out there for this week. Then afterwards, I'll look at my betting and DFS exposure with some of my top plays out there for this tournament. It's a fun one. It's our last event of this year. So if you're gonna have that tour status for 2025, it's your last chance to go out there and get into the rankings. So a lot on the line, and of course, all of our exposure out there as well. So gonna break it all down for you here in a quick, concise format, which speaking of, let's go ahead and just hop right on in. We do have two courses in play this week, but for the sake of simplicity, we're only going to have one custom model that we're running. So it'll be 3 rounds over there on Seaside, Plantation mixed in for 1 round there on Thursday or Friday. So for most of this modeling, we're focusing on the Seaside golf course. So both are short, par 72 over there with Plantation. The Seaside course, as the name would suggest, is a little bit closer to the sea. So you have more coastal winds there. It's a little bit more exposed than the further inland Plantation course, but a very similar type of architectural setup. So a lot of the same kind of things that we'll talk about with the Seaside course can be said about the Plantation as well, but both are relatively short in terms of your proximity buckets on approach. A lot of shots that are coming from 50 to 125 yards, or if they're not from 50 to 125, a lot from 125 to 175. So those 3 buckets there towards the top of our approach profile are going to be by far the most utilized this week. It's also a lot about putting. Anytime you get these shorter, more positional golf courses, you tend to see guys that are better putters towards the top, mostly because they're making more putts than their peers, but also because they're more accurate drivers usually, and also some of the better players with their wedges for the most part. Off the tee, this is more of a driving accuracy course over a driving distance, but you did see that trend change a little bit last year with Ludwig Aubert winning. Maybe not so much because Aubert went out there and hit a bunch of fairways, but more so because he's so good of a player from his approach play. He's one of the best putters that you had in the field, and of course he'll be in the field this time around as well. So it's not to say that you can't be a bomber and win around an RSM Classic. It's just that most of our winners, most of our top 5, top 10s, that's not really something that they were known for. Around the green matters. You've got some really tricky shots around the green if you're missing. You do have about a 14 green regulation average though, so unless it's a real windy day out there, which happens around this golf course, can happen there in St. Simon's Island, it's not going to be a massive factor. That's why it's down here at number 4, but you have some real tricky shots if you are missing greens. Birdie or better percentage comes into play, particularly with more calm conditions. And then for our calm courses, we've got the Saudi Open, Bermuda Championship from last week, Fedex St. Jude, and RBC Heritage, all golf courses that are some of the shortest around the PGA Tour and are about your positioning off the tee. Whether you're at the Plantation course or the Seaside for 3 of your 4 rounds, that is going to be the name of the game. So hopefully gives you an idea for the kind of stats that we're looking for in our players. And I'd say mostly it's that putting and approach play. This is definitely just like the last few weeks, a little bit of a birdie fest when it plays easy. And those are the key stats at all those kind of courses. So you can see we have Bermuda down there. There are a few other courses this fall that fell into that same kind of profile. This week is going to be a lot of the same there. So the kind of modeling that we've had for these last few events is pretty much going to be spot in line with what we're doing for the RSM Classic. So the first play we're going to go through together is going to be Ben Griffin here at $9,300. And towards the top end of the board, it's worth pointing out that we have a stronger field than what we've had for a lot of this fall swing. We've got players like a Brian Harmon, a Siwoo Kim playing, who haven't been there for all the starts this fall. And Aubert, of course, your defending champion. But whether it's a Luke Clanton, you've got guys like Chris Kirk playing. You've got a lot of guys teeing it up over here in St. Simon's Island out here for the last event of the year. And that might be to go out there and really hold their positioning into next year. Maybe it's close by. I know a lot of those Sea Island residents are the ones that are teeing it up here this time, like Davis Thompson, for example, a Brian Harmon. That's likely why they're playing in this kind of golf tournament. But the guys that I prefer towards the top end of the board are players like a Ben Griffin that have been playing over here during the fall swing. To get off the couch, to go out there and try and compete in a PGA Tour event is not the easiest thing to do. Oftentimes, towards the beginning of a season, we'll see players a little bit rusty, especially that haven't played all that recently. And because we've had 2-3 months where some of these guys have not played whatsoever, that worries me a little bit. I wonder about their form. I wonder how their ball striking looks heading into this event. And while it could be a wild card, I'll still have some of those guys in my GPP lineups. I think in a few cases, you're getting high upside, really low floor, of course, because we don't know the form heading in, but really high upside at low ownership. that you might want to mix in if you're looking for some leverage. But with my conviction plays, my core plays, like we're talking here in the video, my potential outright bets that I'm using at the RSM, I'd much rather have a player like Ben Griffin that has not only been playing pretty much every single week, but has a good track record at this golf course and has elite form heading in. So there's not nearly as many question marks about his game. We kind of know what to expect from him in terms of that form. Whereas if you went with a Brian Harman, a Siwoo Kim, who, by the way, both of them fit this golf course perfectly. So if they're relatively low owned, I will definitely have them out there in lineups. It's just that I feel a lot better about a Ben Griffin. So to show you why I have a little bit more confidence there, you'll see that the form heading in is pretty spotless. He's about neutral with both the shots gained, ball striking categories, and then doing his thing with the short game. You zoom out a little bit, it actually gets a little bit better. He's still gaining in most of the categories, except the one real change is that he's gaining over half a stroke approach per round. So you like that for Griffin. You also like the event history if we check that out. You go down here, he had the T8 last year, T29 back there 2 years ago, and then the recent form is just the icing on the cake with Ben Griffin. You have an 8th place, a top 25, T22. Did have the one missed cut, but it's a T11, a T37 finish there 5 weeks ago. He's been grinding it out. He's been trying to make sure that he's going to have full status out there for 2025. And this kind of golf course that is not off the tee centric is perfect for Ben Griffin's game. So I think he's a little bit expensive. I would say that he's probably should be closer to like $88, maybe $8,900. But I think what that's going to do out there in large field GPPs is going to keep his ownership lower than it should. You've got Poston coming in off a win. You've got Power, McNeely, who I think is going to deservedly get some ownership out there in GPPs. Ben Griffin, you're probably looking at most like 15%. It's early on a Tuesday, so a lot can change by the time that we get to lock, but I'm assuming that Ben Griffin is going to be average, if not slightly below average ownership when it comes to this 9K range. And if that's going to be the case on somebody that's actually been playing recently, has been playing really solid golf, the shots gained ball striking stats are really the one slight negative that we have heading in, but he's been about a neutral in both categories, and the last few events where he's had really good starts, 8th place and then a T24 there 2 weeks ago, there were no shots gained metrics to work with. So you would have to think that with those 2 top 25s, that top 10 finish last week, that he was probably gaining with his ball striking stats. Hard to say because we don't have the actual shot trails to back it up. But one would assume with those 2 top 25 finishes that he probably has better form than what these shots gained would indicate. So if you're using the shots gained like the gospel this week, I would push back on that just a little bit, as you don't have the shots gained metrics for the last 2 starts on tour, and especially guys that teed it up in both events and played well probably aren't getting a big enough boost out there in your projections and modeling. So that is something that I, of course, accounted for. He's playing better than the stats would indicate, and towards the top end of the board might come in at average to below average ownership. 33 to 1, by the way, was the outright number that I took, but maybe an even better play out there for DFS. Next up, we got Harris English here at $8,900. So he's the same number in terms of an outright, a little bit cheaper in terms of that Draftkings price. And just like a Ben Griffin, I don't see him getting all that much ownership. You have a few other guys in this range, like even the Mackenzie Hughes that I think might get slightly higher ownership. A Luke Clanton, $8,600. I've got to say, like, his projection is just through the roof with how good he's been on the PGA Tour. And Austin Eckroat with his really solid finish. You got other guys in this range that have also had some top 5s, some top 10s. So Harris English, he's been quietly really, really strong during this fall swing, is I think going to be about average ownership, if not slightly below average ownership like we have there with Ben Griffin. And the reason why I like him so much would come down to the form, then also that course history. So T14 a few weeks ago, those shots gained metrics are not accounted for out there in that recent form. A T9, also a T6 finish. It's worth noting that you did have shots gained metrics for both of those events, but they were 2-3 weeks ago. He was mostly going, and if I show you the last 12 measured rounds, you'll see how he was actually getting it done. He was losing on approach and mostly doing it with the short game, but I can tell you from seeing the broadcast a few weeks ago that his iron play is a lot better than these stats would indicate. So you look at this negative 0.58 shots and you think, oh, his ball striking must be off. Well, I can tell you that when they didn't have those shots gained metrics a few weeks ago, he was hitting dart after dart. So here at $8,900, I don't think the shots gained profile really gives you the full story, because Harris English not only solid form heading in, you have, what was that, 3 top 14 finishes in a row, but if you take a look at his event history, he's also been really good at this golf course. You have 2 top 30 finishes in a row, a couple missed cuts, which aren't great, but also that T6 finish there 4 years ago. So he clearly likes this kind of track, which, if you want to play the whole narrative game, he is a part of that Sea Island Mafia that plays out of Sea Island, plays these golf courses all the time, probably has some of the highest amount of rounds of anyone of the entire field around both of these golf courses. So at $8,900, he's shown it to us on paper before. He's playing some of his best golf over the last 3-4 years. He had all the injuries that really derailed him towards the beginning of the season, but he's starting to look like the vintage Harris English, who, if you're new to PGA DFS, maybe you don't know this about Harry, but he used to win a bunch of tour events. He'd win at the Travelers, a short positional golf course. He had a few other wins. I believe Colonial was another golf course that he was able to win at. He's had a lot of success at golf courses that aren't brutally long off the tee, which kind of is counterintuitive to what you'd think if you think about his skill set, because he is a relatively long player off the tee, not the most accurate. So at a track like this, seaside course especially, that forces you to lay up off the tee so often, it takes some of that risk, some of those really big misses that Harris English has, it takes them out of play because he's not hitting driver as often. So maybe that's why these golf courses are a little bit more favorable to him. You've seen it at this specific venue, and you've seen it at other short tracks as well around the PGA Tour. So Harris English here at $8,900, that's the exact sort of play that I'm looking to get to. We've also got an Eric Cole here at $8,700. So Eric Cole is tailor-made for this event, and you saw it last year. So he finished in T3 here in 2023, T39 the year before that, and his form heading in is solid. It's not fantastic. It's not as good as some of the other guys that we've talked about here, but if you take a look at the recent form, T6 there 3 weeks ago, did have the missed cut and then a T16 finish. So the missed cut really throws it off, especially because he missed the cut in ugly fashion. So you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, and you're not really getting the full picture here, right? He's losing off the tee, he's losing like a half a stroke with the putter. That is vastly misleading compared to what he's actually been doing, because you take a look at the finishes, it's been a lot of top 20s. You take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, I think it gives you a better idea of how he's actually been playing. He's about a neutral with the putter. In reality, he's been actually gaining in most events out there on tour. He has been losing off the tee, so that really hasn't changed since that last 12 measured rounds, but the approach play is even better. He's solid around the green. This is the kind of stat profile that he's realistically actually been posting. This last 12 measured rounds, just like a few of the other players that we've gone through, when you don't have all the shots gained metrics for every event during the fall, you just can't look at them with full certainty. Not like we would in the middle of the regular PGA Tour schedule, when you have everyone playing pretty much every single week. This is not that kind of situation whatsoever. So in Eric Cole, I more so like that event history. I like some of those recent finishes that we've had. And if you take a look at where he's had some of these finishes, like a Zozo is not a super off the tee heavy course. The Sanderson Farms, where we had the T16, that's a golf course where Mackenzie Hughes has won it before. A Peter Malnati, some of the really shitty off the tee players on tour have gone out there and gotten their tour wins. This kind of golf course sets up the same kind of way. So hopefully you can go out there, have a good approach week. The putter on Bermuda grass is typically a huge strong point out there for Eric Cole. So though he's been losing about a half a stroke putting per round lately, on Bermuda grass, he normally gains just under a half a stroke per round. So you would imagine that there's a lot of positive regression that he has coming for him. And if so, it could be a really big week for him. So took him at 44-1, also $8,700. I think he'll get some ownership, just like the top two guys that we talked about, but I don't think that he's going to be overly chalky because of the fact that he's losing strokes heading into this event. So if that happens, if he's going to be around average ownership, then I'm going to be glad to get well over the field there. Before we talk about our last three plays, which will be our values over here for the RSM, do want to remind you guys of where you can find these spreadsheets for yourself. That, of course, would be over there on my Patreon page, where I'm posting all of these completely uncensored. That'll, of course, include all of my projections, modeling, player pool, shots gained metrics, form, you name it, for every single player in the field. So on these videos, I try to point out some of my top plays across the board. But of course, golf fields are massive. We have, in this case, over 150 players that'll that'll be teeing it up. If you want my take on every player to go out there and craft your entire process, well, make sure to check out the link in the description of the video. On my Patreon page for just $15 a month, you get access to all the main slate content that I'm posting, as well as showdown for rounds 2 through 4. So if you enjoy this type of research-based analysis, all this data-based stuff that I use, make sure to check it out. Use it for your own process. It'll speed up your process. It'll make it a lot easier to get all of the information that you need without having to go from website to website, tab to tab, driving yourself crazy to go over there and get all of that data. I put it in a very easy to read, digestible fashion, one spreadsheet to give you all the information that you need and not a lot of the extra BS that you see out there in other sites. I feel like you see way too much being done in this PGA DFS space. It's nice to have data, it's nice to have modeling to work with, but you shouldn't be looking at 25 factors for every single event. There are things that we can look at to really simplify that process, and whether it's projections, it's ownership, it's course fit rankings, recent form, that's what matters. You don't need to have a list of 15 different stats that you're looking at the same time. If you're looking at the most important 4 or 5 different things, that is what is going to change your process and what is actually actionable. So if you want actionable data, you don't want a bunch of BS that's being thrown at you, make sure to check out my Patreon page for my take on every single player out there in the field. And now for our last 3 plays. So the first up, we got Justin Lowery here at $7,700, and he's been really good the last few weeks. And if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, you're not going to see that. So just like a few of the other players that we've gone through, his form is no doubt going to get a few people on him this week, but the shots gained metrics aren't including this T5 and this T2 finish. So you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds. I mean, he's been playing solid golf, right? He's gaining in 3 of the 4 categories, decent with the shots gained ball striking, about 2/3 of a stroke per round out there with the putter. In reality, he is playing much, much, much better than you can tell here on paper, because those 2, top 5 finishes, I believe, T5 and then a T2 finish there a few weeks ago aren't even incorporated into that. So I would say that, Lauer's going to be chalk. I think at least 10%, maybe close to like 15 to 16% out there in contest. But you could argue at $7,700 at another golf course that is short, positional, really fits his style of golf, that he should be like 20 to 25% out. In my opinion, I want to have at least 20-25%, if not more than that, out there in lineups. That's where I think that's where he should come in with ownership. My intuition is because his form just looks okay. I mean, he's gaining about a stroke per round if you're just looking at the actual shots gained metrics that we have available. His form heading in looks okay on paper, so I think he'll get some exposure, like 15, maybe 20% ownership, but I don't think he's going to be in that 20 to 30% range like he should. So at 55 to 1, I got that in a Hard Rock bet. That is still available, by the way. I think it's the best number in the industry, because elsewhere he has already completely shifted down. So he's at 35 to 1 on a few books, I think 40, 45 to 1 at the very most on things like DK or DraftKings. So if you can still get that kind of number, I would take advantage while you can, because the steam is going to knock it down at some point. And in terms of the course fit, I like some of these top level players. You play them at courses where it's not super off the tee heavy, and that's what we have with both of these tracks at the RSM, especially Seaside. It's one of the shorter tracks that we have on the PGA Tour schedule, and he has been laser focused with his wedges lately, especially from like 125 and in. Last few weeks, I've been listening to a lot of the events on the radio. It's how I've been really taking in a lot of the content. It's crazy that we have to resort to that here during the fall swing, but all I hear these announcers talk about how it's Justin Lower is dialed in with the wedges, that he's been hitting them to 5-10 feet over and over again. Not even just like the play-by-play, but like you hear that on previous holes, he was super dialed in with the wedges. That's what I want with a play this week, and especially one that might be going slightly under the radar because of those shots gained metrics. So I'll play him at $7,700, even at some inflated ownership. You're not going to get him at sub 15%. Like, I'll tell you right now, he's going to be chalky, but I would argue that he's probably going to be lower owned than he should. Next up, we got Carson Young down here at 110 to 1. So quite the outright number that they have hanging on Carson. And just like you had there with Lauer, the last few weeks, which have been really solid for Carson Young, are not going to be incorporated into these metrics. So it was a T62 last week. He at least made the cut, but T2 is completely unincorporated. He also had a T11 4 weeks ago. T37, he did have one missed cut mixed into those last 6 starts, but you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, and I mean, it's slightly impressive. I mean, he's gaining in the 2 ball striking categories. He's been a decent putter lately, just losing around the green, which at a golf course, by the way, where you're averaging 14 greens of regulation per round, like that around the green stuff just really doesn't matter to me all that much. If it gets windy, it might. That was the added caveat I was adding before, but with calm conditions, Carson Young should tear up this style golf course. So the fact that he's down here at $7,200, I would argue that is far too cheap. He's number 22 in the model ranking, but that doesn't include his best start by far all of the entire year with those shots gained metrics. He feels like the perfect buy low spot. Last week, he got some ownership because of that T2 finish, but after hardly making the cut, having that T62, I don't think he's going to be nearly as popular as what he was last time around. So Lauer, you're definitely going to have some ownership on. Carson Young could very well be sub 5%. At the very most, it's going to be like 7, maybe 8% ownership out there in GPPs. So the long-term stuff, by the way, absolutely loves him. So it's not even just recent stuff that likes Carson Young here. You can see the long-term stuff gaining about a half a stroke per round off the tee. Solid approach player, decent out there with the putter. At these cult courses where you don't have to be an absolute bomber off the tee are the ones where he could go out there and potentially get the job done, which is why I like him at this sort of event. If we take a look at the event history, which first off, by the way, for Lauer has been 3 missed cuts, which, about as ugly as it possibly could get. But, you know, there's got to be one good thing, one bad thing for some of these players. That is the one clear negative, the one clear con against playing a Justin Lauer. We go down here to look at Carson Young. T71 last year, not really getting the job done for us, and then a missed cut before that. That would be the one negative with both of these sort of plays. So I like the form heading in. I think that they're playing their best golf. They're just different players at this stage of their career. And I guess time will tell how they go out there and fare against the RSM Classic this time. Then the last play we're going to go through is Ben Kohles, who I took at 165 to 1 to go out there and win. He's down here at $7,000, and last year did have a good start at this event. So you had the T5 finish there before missing the cut 3 years ago. We go down here to the last 12 measured rounds, and though it doesn't have his last few starts accounted for on here, what's his price tag, right? Yeah, $7,000 to go up here and find him. They always end up blended in there for me because he's slightly gaining off the tee. Not the best short game lately. We'll talk about that here in a second, but gaining about 0.8 strokes per round on approach. And if we take a look at his career stuff, though, he's normally a gainer on Bermuda grass. So on that grainy Bermuda grass, he's normally able to go out there and make some putts, which compared to his 24-round baseline is already a lot better, right? His 24-round baseline, by the way, he's losing 0.4 strokes per round putting. Lately, though, 1.27 strokes gained putting per round. So, I mean, he's just been absolutely horrendous lately. So hopefully getting him on some comfortable Bermuda grass can make him, get back to that usual putting that we see, which is usually a lot better than what we've seen over the last 24 rounds. So compared to the 24 round baseline, it's a whole 0.66 shots easier, I should say. Compared to his 12 round baseline, though, it's like a 1.5 shot difference there between the baseline. So I would say that he's due for some positive regression. And the form, if we take a look at the last few starts out there for Ben Kohles, you see he had the T57, T56, the T16 at the Sanderson Farms was mighty fine impressive. He just has kind of been hanging around, right? He hasn't been doing all that much, mostly because that putter has been failing him, but the rest of the game has been decent, especially that approach play, right? Gaining just over 0.8 strokes per round. If he can flip that short game, I think it could be a big week for Ben Kohles. So I'll play him on that familiar surface. You can see the long-term stuff is very favorable out there for him as he's the number 16 play in the entire field. So at 165 to 1, I've seen worse bets in my entire life, but especially for DFS where a top 10 finish likely pays off, I think he's got that well within his range of outcomes. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the DFS and betting preview. Before before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button for me. Also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come, including our round 2 through 4 live streams and our Wednesday stream going over all the content before lock. That'll include any of your questions down there in the live chat, look at the weather report, how that'll impact play over Thursday and Friday, as well as some of the last second player poll notes and prop stuff there on Underdog and Prize Picks. So for that, the stream's there for rounds 2 through 4 as well. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of that. Also comment down below who you've got winning this golf tournament for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. If you get the winner of the event, you will win a free month access to the golf tier. So go ahead, claim your player down below because it'll be early bird gets the worm this time. So once the player's taken once, they cannot be taken again. So before you go out there and give me your player to win, make sure that somebody hasn't stolen them from you, and make sure to do it as soon as possible so that you can get your guess in. But best of luck over there with the giveaway with all of your exposure this week. Let's take down a GBP or two. Let's go out there, cash an outright bet as well, and make this RSM Classic a fun one.